All right, recording has started. You can begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you to Group 1, Marcia, Majid, and Ian for that very interesting and insightful presentation on understanding self. Because it is only when we understand ourselves that we can go on to understand others. And this is the only way that we can become truly successful leaders. Please allow me to introduce Group 2 members, Natasha Lopez, Rohan Lawrence, and myself, Nicole Joseph. This afternoon, we will be discussing Chapter 5, and the topic will be Understanding Others. An overview of the chapter tells us that the chapter is briefly exploring the topics of gender, ethnicity, and culture that illustrate how differences must be understood as we work toward inclusive and empowering leadership. This chapter also looks at various leadership processes, which includes communication, conflict resolution, and decision making. These are all influenced by diverse approaches. The chapter concludes with a discussion of communication skills, such as empathy and assertiveness, that are useful in working effectively with others in leadership. We will first look at individuality and commonality. Individuality is the quality of being an individual and what sets you apart from others. For example, being good, having a bad attitude, liking a particular hairstyle, the way you speak, and even the way you laugh. Commonality refers to the sharing of common attributes, and these are what make you similar to other people, such as a group of persons attending the same church, or a group of students having the same hobbies, or even thinking alike. Each and every one of us brings uniqueness and individuality to any situation we find ourselves in. As we learned in Chapter 4, your skills, background, and preferences create a unique person. That's you, but you are not alone. To be truly inclusive and empowering, you must also understand others. The importance of this cannot be overstated. As nations become more diverse, the world becomes smaller and more connected through technology. We are more alike than unlike, my friends. We are more alike, my friends, and we are unalike. Sorry. This was a quote from Maya Angelou from one of her poems from 1994. Other people might be similar to you, different or very different from you, even if they look like you. They may have different preferences and values. And some of these differences come from our gender, ethnicity, or culture, as we shall see in this chapter. Research into the human genome has confirmed that as humans, we are indeed more alike than we are different. But in order to balance our perceptions of difference, we ought to focus on our common human purpose. Wherever people are gathered, you will see people who look like you, men and women with visible ethnic or racial similarities. They may even share the same interests as you, like living in the same village, affiliating with the same political party, or having children who attend the same school. When you find people like you develop a feeling of association, and this is called social identity, which leads to the creation of sub-communities. With social identity, you identify with people like you, which leads to the creation of social sub-communities, as I just said. And here you identify with people with whom you share similar ideas. You identify with people who share similar goals. You also identify with people who come from similar backgrounds. On a spiritual level, something binds each of us to one another, regardless of our differences. And we all ultimately want to work toward one common purpose. For example, being successful at the end of our MGPS course at CUSTAT. The challenge with leadership, though, is finding that common purpose amongst the vast sea of individuals so that a we can be created from a group of individuals. The gentleman who you all are seeing on the right side of the screen is a man called Martin Buber. He was an Austrian, Jewish, and Israeli philosopher who was best known for his philosophy of dialogue, a form of existentialism which focused on the I-thou relationship. His philosophy was basically centered around dialogue of men with other beings, more so other human beings, but ultimately resting on and pointing to our relationship with God. He believed that when someone meets another as thou, the uniqueness and separateness of the other person is recognized without blocking the relatedness or common humanness that it should. Leadership educators tend to encourage the I, you, we concept, which suggests that the capital I needs to be changed to a common I for one to really be able to listen, engage with someone else as an equal, so that everyone can move together to form we. Challenge one with this, though, is to understand yourself, as was mentioned in chapter 4, so that you will know how others see you and you will know that whether or not you need to modify your behavior to encourage others to be open and feel connected to you. Pluralism, or what is known as pluralistic leadership. The pluralism of a group refers to the vast differences that exist and needs to be understood so that shared goals can be achieved. This type of thinking leads to pluralistic leadership, which emerges when heterogeneous groups of people come together to form a change. So people with different ideas, different backgrounds, different cultures, they come together to accomplish one common change. One of the best examples of pluralism can be found in the United States because it has a dominant culture with strong elements of nationalism, a sporting culture, and an artistic culture, which contains smaller groups with their own ethnic, religious, and cultural norms. Next, we will look at understanding diversity, beginning with gender diversity. What is gender diversity? According to Wesleyan University, which is a US university, in 2018, they came up with the definition that gender diversity refers to the extent to which a person's gender identity, role, or expression differs from the cultural norms prescribed for people of a particular sex. Note the difference with Wikipedia definition, which states that gender diversity is equitable or fair representation of people of different genders. And it most commonly refers to an equitable ratio of men and women. Note that difference, please. Um, as of 2018, there were different, I don't even know what to call it, if it's genders or sexes, were introduced to include uh, and encourage diversity, I guess. When questioning what is gender diversity, we can ask ourselves, how does my gender influence my attitude towards others and how I behave? Or how do my experiences as a man or woman affect my worldview? And how does it shape the worldview of those around me? Gender differences are countless, but it is important that we realize that we all deal with roles depending on our sex and roles depending on our gender. A lot of times, sex roles and gender roles are mistakenly used interchangeably, but are actually very distinct and different. Okay, so this image here shows uh, the difference between sex and gender. If we look at the female on the left side of the screen, it states that gender is culturally defined. Same thing for the male, gender is also culturally defined, whereas sex is biological. So with gender, we look at things such as roles and responsibilities. We expect a female to have a caring role, the role of caring for the family, right? Or engaging in service jobs such as waitressing or um, working in the hospitality industry, whereas we expect men to be working in construction or part of, of the defense structures in different countries, such as the police force or the army. Women are also referred to as or expected to be fragile and emotional. Those are some of the attributes, whereas men are more expected to be risk-taking and aggressive. Women also, which I don't personally agree with this one, but this is according to the findings, women are expected to be financially dependent on men, whereas men have financial autonomy. All right. When we speak about the biological aspect of sex, we are speaking about the different chromosomes that determine what sex we are. We have clear, distinct reproductive organs that also distinguishes a male from a female. And of course, not to mention the hormones that control everything, right? Very often, gender roles can be limited and incorrect. For example, even though women can bear children, this does not mean that only the female sex has the ability to be nurturing. And this concept has deprived many men from being nurturing towards their children. From time to from the time that we were born, our perception of gender roles starts to be formed by messages from our environment. There are some parents who try not to promote gender stereotypes with their children by not specifying what type of toy they play with, but eventually they realize that their children are being influenced by socializing agents anyway, such as peers at school, the toys that they may play with while they're at school, television shows that they may watch while we are not around, and even advertisements promote the roles that genders are supposed to play. How we behave as adult men and women is also guided by our childhood development. The way we play as children sets patterns of how we work and interact as others. For example, if you look at this slide, we will see where boys are boys like to play outside. They prefer to play rough games as opposed to the kind of games that girls like to play, right? Uh, Boys tend to be more extroverted leaders. Winning is important to them. And most games involve teams, for example, as I'm sure some of the guys in this class would be familiar with, Call of Duty. Girls, on the other hand, often play inside. And playing among girls would occur within a small, intimate group. Girls tend to value social relationships, friendships with the other girls, and they prefer games where there are no winners or losers. The social learning, which is brought about by playing and other events, often causes females to value intimacy and relationships, whereas it causes males to seek and value more independent relationships or more independent existence. A male's world tends to focus on status, where independence is of utmost importance. A primary method of establishing status is telling others what to do, and this is seen as a symbol of status among men. Whereas in a female's world, intimacy is crucial in this world because connection to individuals is seen as important. Network of friends is also seen as important. Females tend to play down differences between each other. They tend to encourage compromise instead of my way or the highway. and they tend to value the appearance of superiority in self, even though they may try not to exert this superiority. I want you all to think about how uncommon it is to see actors playing roles that are different from conventional or traditional gender roles. Think about that. Men and women even attribute different factors for their success and failure. Men credit internal factors to their success, such as being prepared for an exam or that they were very naturally capable. And men, on the other hand, tend to blame external factors for their failure, such as fate or, it was just the day was off. It was a bad lucky day for them. Women, on the other hand, credit external factors for their success, such as being lucky, or they were probably wearing their lucky bracelet that day, or they were in the right place at the right time. Women also blame internal factors for failures, such as not having enough time or not having the necessary skills to perform whatever tasks they were assigned. Nevertheless, besides the differences between men and women, both are completely capable of making sound decisions, becoming effective leaders, and responsible group members. Next, we will look at cultural diversity, where culture is seen to be made up of the different ways that we live, including our values, our family values, our spiritual beliefs, our aesthetic or beauty standards, our linguistic expression, whether we speak English, Spanish, French, or sign language, our patterns of thinking, which is also shaped by uh, during our childhood by our parents, principally, what is considered behavioral norms in the societies that we come from, and the different styles of communication. The different ways we live, including our spiritual values, moral beliefs, what beauty standards are considered acceptable, the languages speak, how we think and process ideas, have all been used to contribute to what we call culture. In our culture, for example, we love to use a lot of hand gestures and facial expressions as Trinidadians. So as you can see, culture is a broad term, and many cultures coexist simultaneously in any group, any group that you can think of. So, as an effective leader, you must develop an appreciation for multiculturalism if you want to encourage inclusivity, collaboration, and common goals. We will just look briefly at some of these cultural differences. Um, we can identify kinship. When we say kinship, we refer to the basis of societal organization, families. For example, families consisting of at least one parent and one child is customary in all societies, but there are many differences beyond this, where we have extended families, right? We have adopted families and so on. Marriage. Marriage leads to cultural differences, even though marriage and families often appear to be human universals. There are differences. Sexuality, which we will explore a bit more later on in the chapter, interestingly enough, societies vary significantly in the degree to which they encourage or discourage intimacy. Art, we will also look at art a bit later on in the chapter, where we see
Yeah, I go no
art.
next, so forget me.
Virtually all societies have some form of art, whether it's visual art, music, singing, or dancing. Religion. Religious beliefs are features of all known societies. Gender, how we categorize children into binary categories of female and male, is fairly common, but recently there has been a significant cultural diversion from this, which we as leaders need to become more tolerant of. There are different sports, dwellings, and celebrations that encourage or that show us cultural differences among people. Now, when we speak about culture, we have to ask ourselves the question, is culture the same as race? Race, as defined by Hoops and Push of 1979, is a somewhat suspect concept used to identify large groups of the human species who share a more or less distinctive combination of hereditary physical characteristics. But race is not culture. People have often described culture in terms of race, and this may be an easy trap to fall into since we tend to associate cultural practices with different races. Both race and culture refers to people, groups, and their classifications, although both words differ in how they classify people. Race is a classification of people according to their physical appearance, geographic ancestry, and genetic characteristics. Culture, on the other hand, is a classification of people, yes, but it's according to their beliefs and values, as was mentioned by, was it Ian in chapter 4, that uh, include spirituality, religion, region that they come from, the language that they speak, and how they make their livelihoods. In other words, race is based on physical appearance, while culture is based on beliefs, values, and life symbols. People with the same race can have different cultures, and likewise, people with the same culture can be of different races. Historically, race has played a powerful part in many Americans' lives and continues to be problematic up to today. The culture of the powerful majority, and we know who this is, in the US has become the majority norms, which are the standards used to judge those who are not part of that majority. I don't know if you all ever heard of Peggy McIntosh. This was a Caucasian lady who in 1989 introduced the phrase the invisible knapsack, which is a code for white privilege. Right? The knapsack is a metaphor for, it's metaphorically filled with items, which um, helps you to make it through life effortlessly. She also was of the opinion that people with privilege, in quotation marks, are presumed to be innocent, worthy, and competent. So leaders need to know that there are people who think like this out there. Next, we will look at international diversity. International diversity refers to diversity among the cultures of different countries. So we go to a different level. We are taking the diversity to a whole new level. International diversity refers to understanding how to work with people from other countries, right? And this is even more complicated and can be more challenging than any of the other types of diversity. Some college students in the US, again, they actually get the opportunity to live and study with students from other countries that help them to understand this diversity before they actually enter the world of work and before they enter adulthood. To be successful when interacting with people from different cultures, managers need to be knowledgeable about cultural differences. They also need to know about how similar the type of similarities they have with people from other countries. They also need to be aware of the differences that they have from people of other countries and how this may affect how they interact. They need to develop skills, the necessary skills to act appropriately and not act as we like to say in Trinidad, so that they wouldn't be acting out of time in, right? And they also need to know how to make culturally sensitive decisions in order to be successful leaders. GLOBE, I don't know if you remember this from, I believe it was Site 103. GLOBE stands for Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness. GLOBE, they did this entity, Project GLOBE, they did an international study where they conducted, the study involved thousands of middle managers and around the world, and 9 dimensions of culture were uncovered, and they all varied from country to country. These dimensions are assertiveness, future orientation, gender differentiation, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, institutional emphasis on collectivism versus individualism, in-group collectivism, performance orientation, and humane orientation. But like I said, we would have studied this before in Psych 103, right? Some countries tend to be higher than others in the different dimensions. For example, people in the US are thought to be more male dominated than people in England, but less than people in Germany. That being said, when working with others of different nationalities, understanding that they may differ from you in the aforementioned dimensions can help you to understand them and better have a more effective work relationship and be more effective as a leader. Remember, you must become knowledgeable about other nations since the world is becoming more of a global village than ever before. Thank you, and this is the end of my presentation. I will now hand you over to Natasha, who will speak about cultural heritage, building multicultural appreciation, and attitudes towards differences. Natasha?
Thank you, Nicole, for that insightful delivery as well as introduction. Thanks also to the team that went before. What is, so I'll indicate when I'm ready for the slide change. So you can
Yes.
change to the next slide.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
What is our cultural heritage? How do we acquire our culture? Can we learn from the culture of others? So as Nicole mentioned before, a wide range of things make up our culture, the way we do things, our background, our values, our beliefs. As an effective leader, we have to be aware that people are different. People have differences. They have different assumptions that influence their behavior, the way they think, and the contribution that they could make or would make to the group. So we can see that assumptions are based on culture as well. We have different cultures. We have how we view um, others, such as whites, Europeans, Asians, and Latinos, may be different because they do things differently to us as individuals. So we're looking at others from our point of view. We're in a global village and the cultural boundaries are undefined. So as Nicole mentioned, artists and artisans, they belong to different cultures, so much different from each other, but they also borrow or learn from and inspire each other. Just think about Mona Lisa. So we have a picture of Leonardo da Vinci on your screen there. He's an Italian painter. A lot of other artists borrowed from him, so much so that they claimed the Mona Lisa as their own cultural heritage. So we have to be a little careful too as a group leader and be mindful that we're not claiming we have to acknowledge, even though we borrow from others, we have to acknowledge that it is not ours and it is the contribution of someone else. So we have to be inclusive. Being inclusive means that we have to gain the ability to hear, to be open-minded to different people and different ideas, and be aware that our knowledge base, the group's knowledge base, would be broadened if we acknowledge the contribution that everybody could make. So this is what it means to be inclusive. Thank you, Nicole. Next slide. So an effective leader knows the benefit of using his ability to manage diversity, as we mentioned before, different people, cultures that could contribute to the group. He has to develop and learn to communicate clearly, having this knowledge, and understand the people that seem different. In order for him to do that, he must build something called multicultural appreciation. To build multiculturalism, there has to be a hurdle that must be crossed. Next slide. This hurdle is known as ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is a human survival response that tells us that our culture is the best. So we could see it from Americans. When you go any part of the world, they try to impose their culture on the world. Some of the traits that could help you identify such a person is intolerance, outright hostility or aggression towards the culture of others. Persons who don't get beyond the stage exhibit cultural superiority. And as we mentioned before, they try to impose their culture on others. In order to get to the point of multiculturalism, we have to transition out of ethnocentrism, which is quoted by Hooks 1979, where there are 7 stages, which begins with ethnocentrism. So as we mentioned before, that is the survival response that tells us our culture is our own. So the next stage to get out of ethnocentrism is awareness. Awareness followed by understanding, acceptance. Next slide, please. Appreciating or valuing the culture of others, selective adoption, and multiculturalism. So in understanding, we have to piece together our experiences of what we know of the other cultures, other people's cultures, and so on. We could acknowledge it, we could borrow it, sorry, but we must acknowledge that it is not our own. We must acknowledge it as whosever it is. Acceptance and respect and tolerance. We have to accept the cultures of others without comparing it to what we do, what is our own. It's different from us, so we compare, they are superior, inferior. We must not do that. Appreciating and valuing, we must understand each other's culture has, as Marissa mentioned before, strengths and weaknesses, right? So don't look at somebody else's culture and some aspect of it as a weakness because we don't do it like that. That may very well be a strength in their culture, but because we don't know it, we see it as a weakness. Selective adoption, adopting a new attitude and behavior from the culture of others, something that we could emulate from them, we could take from them, we could pattern and take example from them. So we have to look to see what they do, something that we could emulate. So the point of self-actualization or multiculturalism is an ideal state and an ongoing process where a person is able to feel comfortable and communicate effectively with people from many cultures and in many situations. This could happen only if they are very open to new experiences. Next slide. So here we have a picture of an archaeological site in Cambodia. Next slide, please. Right, so and this one is rum and Coca-Cola. So the previous one, they had a lot of cultural history there, and people, they came, they stole, they dug up the site and so on. And nobody knew about them because people just stole from them. So this is what we must not do. And in this one, this is a local song sung by a Calypsonian. Many of us may not know him, Lord Invader, many years ago. He sung Rum and Coca-Cola. However, in the picture, in the inset there, you're seeing 3 ladies. They are known as the Andrews sisters. quote unquote stole the song, took it to the US, and it is now claimed as US culture, a US based song. So this is something we must not do. Next slide. So we go into the attitude towards difference. Next slide. The attitude towards difference is a step of 8 items that lead us out of ethnocentrism, right? So it begins with repulsion, pity, tolerance, acceptance. So that is the negative level of attitudes, and then we go to the positive levels, which are support, admiration, appreciation, and nurturance. So it's a scale. The highest point of the scale is 8, and within the lower level, the highest point is 4, which is acceptance. So what this scale is asking us is to come out of the negative region. Even though we are at the level of acceptance, that is not good enough. We have to reach to number 8, which is coming out of the negative level into the positive levels of attitudes. So what is number 8? What is called nurturance. Next slide. This scale was developed by Dr. Dorothy Riddle Pityer Inset. Right. It's a model used to understand people's responses towards homosexuality. So this is specific to homosexuality. It includes 4 negative, as mentioned before, and 4 positive levels of attitude towards, as we're speaking specifically to homosexuality, right? Lesbians and gay men. It has been adapted to apply to that group, the LGBTQ group, and the group spectrum. So we are aware that we have different genders. So as an effective group leader, what we know as normal may not be the normal, if you all understand what I'm saying. All right, so we have to be an inclusive means we have to be aware of what's going on around us, be aware that everybody's different, there are different people in the group, and we must not ostracize their contribution because they are different. So this is the takeaway from this here. Next slide. So, in order for us to use the scale, remember it's a scale, it's 1 to 8, right? So the scale of attitudes about homosexuality is shown on a continuum of 8 factors, from repulsion to celebration, what we call celebration or nurturance, right? So let me ask you here now, based on all that I've told you, where are you on the scale? Before we move on to the next slide, think about it. Where are you on the scale? Next slide, please. Thanks. Repulsion. So I'll go on to explain what those factors are, those 8 factors in the scale that we just mentioned. I'll go on to explain these now. Repulsion. So repulsion will tell us that, so remember this is the first stage, and they wanted to get out of this negative region. We entered the negative region, the first 4, into the positive. So the first one, which is repulsion, will tell us that homosexuality is a crime against nature, and it's also a sin. That gays are sick, crazy, immoral, and wicked. Anything could be justified to change them. So ex-gay ministries, prison, therapy, this is what we think in shock treatments. People can be excused for gay baiting, gay bashing, or gay killing. They should not be expected to enforce various affirmative policies regarding jobs. So we're speaking about the same gay and homosexual persons, right? They must not contribute to these decisions, anything regarding jobs, housing, military ordination, custody, or adoption of children, etc. So as the effective group leader that we want to be, we have to not think like this. We have to come out of this thinking into a third quarter, a new way of thinking. Next slide, please. Thanks. The next factor on the scale is pity, number 2. So pity will tell us that heterosexuality is God's plan and is more mature and certainly is what should be preferred. Any possibility of becoming heterosexual or living as a heterosexual person should be reinforced. Those who seem to be born that way, in inverted commas, are to be pitied, in inverted commas again, the poor dears. Next slide. So we continue with the scale, number 3, tolerance. Tolerance would tell us that homosexuality is just a phase of adolescent development that many people go through and most people grow out of. Thus, lesbian women, gay men are less mature than heterosexual persons and should be treated with the protectiveness and indulgence one uses with a child. Gay men and lesbian women should not be in positions of authority because they are still working through adolescent behavior. So this is what we will be thinking if we at the tolerance stage. At the acceptance stage, we will be thinking that gay men and lesbian women are to be accepted as in, you're not gay to me, you're a person. What you do in bed is your own business. That's fine with me as long as you remain in the closet, you don't flaunt it. So that is what we'll be thinking at the acceptance stage. So remember I said before, this is the negative levels of attitudes, and acceptance, which is number 4, is the highest in this level. And they want you to transition to the positive levels, which begin, next slide, which begins with support. Support will tell us that gay men and lesbian women deserve to have their civil rights protected, even though we may be uncomfortable about their lifestyles. The irrationality, fear, and hatred in this country about homosexuality is inexcusable. So we go on to the next stage, which is admiration. Being gay, lesbian in our society takes strength, whether a person is in or out of the closet. I am aware that I am homophobic and that I need to work on my own understandings and attitudes. So this is the level of admiration that will tell us that. We go on to the next slide. We almost at the point of in inverted commas self-actualization. So we had number 7, which is appreciation. At this juncture, we'll be told that the diversity of people is a valuable thing. Gay men and lesbian women are a valid part of that diversity. Therefore, we are involved in combating homophobia in ourselves and in others. So number 8 will be termed or deemed as celebration because we have achieved the highest level, which is nurturance. And nurturance will tell us that gay and lesbian people are indispensable in society and the church. They have valuable gifts to offer to all of us. I have deep affection, or we have deep affection for particular gay and lesbian persons, and we celebrate their individuality and their gifts. Well, I work as a lesbian and gay advocate in society and in church. So note that it's also in church. Right, so remember, this is the Ritter scale is telling us this. It may not be what some of us believe in, but this is what the Ritter scale has identified to us, that we have to change our mindset if we are to become effective group leaders. Next slide. So this scale will lead us to ask, who are the people we interact with? Who are the people in our group? Do we know them, the backgrounds? Do we acknowledge their contributions? What are our perceptions of them? Our perception of people is influenced by so many factors. Let me ask you this. What are yours influenced by? How we view others who are different from ourselves is complex. So remember that the Ritter scale is asking us to come to a state of awareness, to the nurturance stage, move from even the level of mere acceptance, which it was the highest level in the negative levels of attitudes towards difference, to the positive side, which, as we mentioned, the highest level is nurturance. Next slide. The gay community wants acceptance. Remember that? The gay community wants acceptance. But everyone else wants to be treated fairly too. So these are the different perceptions we see that people have. What we are required to do as leaders, effective leaders, that is to alter our way of life and our way of thinking so that we don't fit everybody into the little box that we know. So it is important that we don't stereotype people. We don't, in order to acknowledge the contribution of everyone, we have to, these are the things that we must do. We must change the way of thinking. So I can't emphasize it enough that this is what is required. Next slide. Diversity. So we were speaking a lot there on diversity. Diversity in the workplace has many benefits. The company will benefit because the culture of the company will be expanded. There will be improved creativity if a decision has to be made, and everyone can contribute, no matter how different, how they look different, how different race, different gender, whatever. These are to be, let's say, overlooked, uh, because we want to see what the contribution they bring, what contribution they bring to the group, right? So we must not be, we must look beyond just, all our biases and stuff like that, and see what contribution they can make, right? So we will see a better improve creative environment. The company will gain new perspective, improve innovation, and also there will be increased employee engagement. Next slide. So what can we gain from changing our way of thinking? The attitude towards different skill will tell us that we will be fostering camaraderie, we will be promoting team unity, there will also be faster problem solving, decision making, and also lower employee turnover. Employee engagement would increase, as well as the branding for our company to attract international customers. All right. So in order to, next slide, please. No, this one. Wrong slide.
On.
Chapter summary. Slide 68. So while we're sorting out that there, I will go on to the chapter summary. The challenge of relational leadership. The ability to understand others, be understood by others, and
Tash,
create.
Johan still has to present.
Sorry. Yes, that's a mistake by me there. Okay, before I hand you over to Rohan, Mr. Rohan Lawrence, who would present on cultural influences on leadership behavior, which will include communication, conflict resolution, and decision making, followed by leadership and communication, which will also include assertive communication and relational empathy. I will come back to do the chapter summary. So I will now hand you over to Mr. Rohan Lawrence. Thank you for that, Nicole.
No problem.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Nicole, and all the first group presenters. Thank you for an insightful presentation. I'm Rohan Lawrence. I'm here to give you do my presentation on cultural influences on leadership behavior. Next slide. The awareness of how such aspects of diversity as sex, race, ethnicity, age, sexuality, identity, and religion, ability, or socio-economic status influence our own behavior and that of others in groups step forward in becoming an effective relational leader. Many leadership practices could be described as participative because they value the empowerment of followers, but relational and pluralistic leadership seeks to change the very culture of the organization or group to see the diversity of the group as a true asset, stated by Loden and Rosanna, 1991. Behaviors grow from a complex interaction of many salient background factors. To understand people's attitudes, being observant of their behavior would be needed. This understanding would lead to the avoidance of stereotyping persons. Next slide. Communication. Communication is vital in terms of how communication is one of the vital influences of culture as it influences leadership. Right? Communication is the exchange or imparting of information through speaking, writing, or conveying mediums, as seen in the picture below, where there are different forms of communication presented. Next slide. Communication continues. Communication helps leaders to define their goals to their teams clearly and also to respond clearly to their team. It helps understand team members' goals and solve their grievances. Effective communication skills also help foster an open and good rapport, a good interaction between the leader and team, which would enhance the productivity and efficiency of the company. Next slide. Why is communication essential? Why is communication as an essential skill for effective leadership? It develops a bond, trust, builds trust, active listening, seeks clarity, you have empathy, ability to ask open-ended questions, receiving and implementing feedback, transparency, and body language. Next slide. You have conflict resolution. Before we resolve conflict, we have to know what conflict is about. Conflict theory states in this picture that a term associated with the theories of Karl Marx in which different groups in society compete over limited resources. Next slide. You have different types of conflicts. You have self-serving fairness interpretation and conflict. Rather than deciding what's fair from a position of neutrality, we interpret what would be most fair to us, which is a form of selfishness, right? Then justify this preference on the basis of fairness. For example, the department heads are likely to each think they deserve the lion's share of the annual budget. We have overconfidence. We tend to be overconfident in our judgment, a tendency that leads us to unrealistic expectations and hence create conflict in itself. Escalation of commitment, whether negotiators are dealing with a labor strike or a merger or an argument with a colleague, they are likely to irrationally escalate their commitment to their chosen course of action long after it has proven useful. We have conflict avoidance. Because negative emotions cause us discomfort or distress, we may try to tamp down, hoping that our feelings will dissipate with time. Next slide. Conflict resolution. What is conflict resolution? Now we're resolving conflicts, right? That conflict resolution can be defined as the informal or formal process that two or more parties use to find peaceful solution to their disputes. As a leader, this is very crucial so that you can have an effective team in a way going forward. Types of conflict resolution most commonly used. We have negotiation, mediation, arbitration, and litigation. Negotiation conflicts. Negotiation and conflict resolution, you can and should draw on the same principles of collaboration, negotiation that you use in deal making. Mediation. In mediation, disputants enlist a trained neutral third party to help them come to a consensus rather than imposing a solution. Encourages disputants to explore their interests underlying their positions. Right? Working with parties both together and separately. Arbitration, which is resemble a court martial. A neutral third party serves as a judge who makes decisions to end the dispute. The arbitrator listens to the arguments and evidence presented by each side, then renders a binding and often confidential decision. Litigation is more, you have a plaintiff, defendant, and plaintiff face off before either a judge or judge and jury, who weigh the evidence and make a ruling. As leaders, we try to not reach to arbitration or litigation through negotiation or mediation. But if must, go through arbitration and litigation would be used. Next slide. Decision making. What is decision making? After all this conflict resolution, we need to come to understand how to make a decision. Decision making is a leadership skill that managers use to assess the situation and determine how the organization may proceed. As seen in this picture below. Next slide. The decision-making process involves the following steps: identifying the challenge, devising solutions, weighing options, making a choice, informing others of the decision. When you identify the challenge, which is the first step in decision-making, because without a challenge or problem, we won't have a decision to make or a problem to solve in that aspect, right? The manager discovers the issues and identifying the challenge. The decisive solution, the manager comes up with possible solutions. We weigh the options and analyze the solution that comes up with, knowing that the advantages and disadvantages of such. We then come together and make a choice, where the leader makes the choice, and then once the choice has been made, they inform others so that all will be on board and they can move forward with whatever projects or taskings that needs to be done. Next slide. Five important decision-making skills: research, creativity, critical thinking, time management, emotional intelligence. Right? Emotional intelligence. I'll jump straight to emotional intelligence. Because that's one of, other than what is the necessity in this decision making, emotional intelligence is one crucial important one also that often overlooked. It is important to be aware of and in control of your emotions as a leader as you make a decision when you are working with others in a decision-making process. It's especially important to be an active listener and empathize while remaining neutral. Next slide. Why decision making is important as an important leadership skill: to improve workplace productivity, create action plans in emergency situations, establish trust with employees, and reduce conflict. Next slide. Leadership and communication. As a leader, you need to be an excellent communicator. You may have shortcomings, but that's only human. But the most important thing is that you learn from those shortcomings and enhance your effective communication skills. Communication skills involves far more than persuasive talking or skillful writing. Listening and communicating in a pluralistic context requires one to listen with empathy. Listening with empathy is an intellectual and emotional participation in other person's experience, stated by Bennett, 1979. Empathy means, so empathy and sympathy. Empathy is often confused with sympathy. Here's why. Here's the difference here. Empathy means you are using other person's standards and reference points to understand that person's experience. In other words, you have to put yourself in that person's shoes, you have to think, analyze, and criticize, as the case may be, how that person, or feel how that person is feeling at that point in time to help them solve or assist them in solving their grievances or situation, problems. Next slide. Sympathy. Sympathy is putting yourself in another person's place, but retaining your own perspective and still using your own standard of judgment. Right? There's a bit look at a little bit of selfishness there, but we'll give it as it is. Leadership communication refers to an effective leader's method of communicating and socializing with their team members and their company's executives. This could include the methods by which they give or receive instruction, report progress, congratulate their team, mediate conflict, and administer appropriate punishment when needed. Next slide. Renowned psychologist Carl Rogers would often require someone to restate what was said by a previous speaker to build a listening skill and awareness of empathy. You learn to listen for empathy if you try to find a point of agreement or genuine understanding with a previous speaker and build on it instead of immediately criticizing, rejecting, or denying the point. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, as stated by Covey, 1991. This requires one to pause, think, and restate for understanding, then build on that point. Criticism that comes too quickly leaves the first speaker thinking he or she was not heard. Next slide. Assertive communication. Socializing has clearly played an important role in how we have learned to converse with each other. In every communication, each person has a right to be heard and a responsibility to listen. Each has a right to make a request or ask a question, and the recipient has the right to make his or her own decision without apology. Being assertive does not mean that you get your own way, but that you did what you could to be understood. This can be related through your team, as they would believe that you would have done your best to respect their involvement, listen for true understanding, and be the productive community member. Assertive communication can often be interpreted as aggressive communication and is not related to passive communication, because it is the form of standing for what you believe and getting persons to follow your belief, but in a respectable and respectful manner. Next slide. This table states the difference or the approach as a person, as a approach a person who think they are assertive, but from group members' perspective or other person's perspective, they may be aggressive, right? So here are the distinguishing features of both. As you see, aggression, we aggression forces needs our opinions on others, whereas assertive express your needs clarity but respectfully. Often involves bullying or pushing others around. Others are treated with respect. So only one needs a matter under aggression. Assertiveness considers the needs of others. You have no compromise and you have compromisation. Assertive means you compromise. Assertiveness improves relationships, whereas aggression damages relationships, which you don't want. Aggression leads to shouting or physical aggression. Assertive use clear language and get point across. Aggression ends up damaging self-esteem of persons, and assertiveness builds the self-esteem of individuals or persons of the group. Next slide. Communicating in an assertive manner can help you to minimize conflict, have your needs better met, control your anger, have more positive relationships with family, friends, and others. Next slide. Relational empathy. Relational empathy. As we will look at relation first. Relation is the mode or manner in which you connect with other persons or things. Empathy is the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel, see things from their point of view. Right, as discussed before. Relational empathy, however, is putting both together. Connecting other persons in a manner which you can understand what they are going through or feeling through putting yourself in their position. Next slide. Right. We have three types of empathy. We have affective empathy, it's the ability to respond to other people's emotions appropriately. Somatic empathy, the ability to feel what other person is feeling. Cognitive empathy, the ability to understand someone's response to a situation. Next slide. The effects of relational empathy on leadership. Empathy allows us to feel safe with our failures because we won't simply be blamed for them. It encourages leaders to understand the root cause behind poor performance. Being empathetic allows leaders to help struggling employees improve and excel. Empathy allows leaders to build and develop relationships with those they lead. Next slide. I now end this part of the presentation with the famous words of esteemed psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung. If one does not understand a person, one tends to regard him as a fool. Thank you. I now hand you over again to Natasha Lopez.
Thanks for that, Rohan. Thanks for taking us through relational leadership. In this chapter summary, we will look at the challenges of relational leadership, the ability to understand others. So these are the challenges: be understood by others and create an effective organizational or group environment. Next slide. So we see that truly understanding the influences of our cultural heritage, gender, and other aspects of our difference helps us work together towards change. We usually find we are more alike than we are different. Expecting commonalities, goodwill, and shared purposes can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. This awareness helps us to create a new third culture in any group. So this has been our presentation today. Nicole looked at individuality and commonality, understanding diversity, which comprise understanding gender diversity, as well as cultural and international diversity. I looked at cultural heritage, building multicultural appreciation and attitudes toward differences. Then we had Rohan, who looked at cultural influences on leadership behavior, which included communication, conflict resolution, and decision making, as well as leadership and communication, which also included assertive communication and relational empathy. So we thank you for listening. You have been an attentive audience. Next slide, please. Okay, we have here some of the references we used for the presentation, and we now hand you over to Mr. Bisu, who will lead the floor for questioning. Thank you.
Right. Are there any questions? Okay, if there are.
So I have one question, but it's not really related to the group presentation. It actually is related to the group presentation, but it's not for the group. My question is the riddle scale. But how these people coming up with all these thought out justification for the behavior, and almost as if it's been forced on the normal citizen to accept. I understand that anything that put forward and packaged in the right way could be accepted, but certain things have a challenge with certain behaviors, and I don't understand why.
Mr. Gibbs, what you have to
it's not
ask yourself is
Right.
where are you on the riddle scale?
I know I won. That's one.
Right. So the whole
am-
point about it is that
Yeah.
the riddle scale has designed to look at where people sit in terms of the process. It's not saying that you're going to have to accept anything, that you don't want to. But what it's really speaking to is where you sit on the spectrum of acceptance and tolerating something like the LGBT definition of behavior. That is something that you have to deal with from a personal standpoint,
Yeah, that's something I want
both
to work
as
on.
an individual and potentially as a leader in the future. Because when you begin to work in a wider environment and you begin to encounter individuals who are possibly gay, then you would have to begin the process of going through, you know, to some level, coming to grips with the whole difference situation. I am not saying that we have to justify why people do what they want to do, but the whole point about it is that the riddle scale is designed for us to evaluate our own positions in relation to those difficult questions that we find ourselves having to answer and to
Okay.
deal with. That makes sense? Yes, I see another question coming up. Ishmael?
Yes, good evening. It's not necessarily a question. Um, I was tuned into to both lectures. Well done, comrades. Particularly in Natasha's presentation, and based on what we're now discussing there, diversity is something I know that we have seen all different forms of it in the work environment, from people identifying with different cultures. I've had some colleagues who would have changed their names, and the organization facilitated that, and they want to be called a particular way. Even though it might seem strange to some people, it's all adaptable. However, with the LGBTQ issue, it is one thing to accept diversity and accept people for who they are and the choices they make in terms of their sexual orientation and all of that. But it's a totally different thing when you are the administrator, when you are identified, and well, based on what we're doing in this course, you are the leader in the organization or a group that have to treat with it. Because it's one thing to even as go so far as to accept them for who they are and what they believe in. But then I'm not sure that in Trinidad and Tobago, at least, we are ready for the wave of changes that is coming. And we spoke about this in another class recently, and some of my colleagues laughed, but I'm really dead serious about it. Take, for example, if someone comes into an organization that we are in as one gender, and during that process, just during some time, they identify as another gender. And you have to administrate, particularly in organizations like police and fire and so on, where you have common dormitories and common washroom facilities and things. I'm seeing a major, major challenge in Trinidad, treating with things like that. But I do understand, the presentation, and I accept that. So it was not so much of a question, but more along the line of a comment.
Yeah, I appreciate your comment because it speaks to where we are as a society when it comes to the hoops. If you remember, Natasha also dealt with the what was it? The hoops intercultural learning process, and that also addressed attitudes towards differences as well. And it really does speak to us as a society and where we are if we were to apply the riddle scale towards it. Legally speaking, a lot of these things are provided for because we have the Equal Opportunities Act and all those things in place. Whether or not we are willing to act upon the legal standpoint that we've put in place is an absolutely totally different situation. So as a society, we have, as you have spoken about, we have a long way to go. As with most societies in the world, in terms of being permissive and understanding and open to do that level of change and that level of thinking or that type of thinking. But I want to thank you guys for the comments that you made, and I want to pause the recording at this point in time, unless anybody has anything that they wanted to add. I saw a hand go up there before I pause the recording. Yeah, Kevin?
Yes, sir. Um, I have a comment as well. You know, it's based on the not the last presentation, but Natasha's group. You know, and on the issue of culture and diversity and all this kind of thing. Right? I just want to point out that just as Ishmael said, right, and Sheldon's comment from before, right, that it is going to be challenging social and cultural issues are going to arise, right? And there are laws, as far as I'm aware, as you mentioned, the Equal Opportunities Act, and then remember, not too long ago when it had the landmark case in Tobago that where the judge struck down certain parts of the Sexual Offences Act, right? Criminalizing or decriminalizing rather um, buggery and all that kind of thing amongst people who have same-sex relationships, right? So the diversity is a big issue. Is a big issue, and it goes across. It's wide reaching because even along the religious lines we're talking about, because we are all part of organizations under the Ministry of National Security, and I have seen, right, where people verbalize, right, the hate for somebody's religion, right, or unaccepting it because maybe the way how they smell or comb their hair, that happens. So I mean the sexuality part is one thing, but you see that race and religion, I think they are even bigger and more explosive than we think it is, especially in Trinidad.
That's
I just
interesting.
like
It's interesting you should bring up race because when Nicole and Natasha were presenting, they spoke about the questionability of the definition of race. There's something that I would like you all to have a look at, and that is the illusion of race. It's a documentary that speaks about the emergence of the concept of race. Um, and really, as they spoke about it, it discredits the concept as being something that is scientifically proven. Um, so it's something that you want to do because you have to remember race was something that was a social construct that was created to, in essence, justify the subjugation of one set of people by another set of people who were deemed to
yep.
be superior.
Mm-hmm.
You have to
Yep.
look at it from that perspective. So there is a film and a documentary, and I think a book as well called The Illusion of Race. Have a look at it, and see where you stand on the thing. All right, let me stop the recording right now.